Welcome, CEOs. I am Hermione Olivia, and I invite you to cherish every opportunity to connect the dots. CEO Yourself was created to be a destination for motivation and to inspire you wherever you are in your journey to become the CEO of your life. Coming up on this week's episode of CEO Yourself.
Originality, and if it doesn't, you may as well just not bother doing it. I think you see with brands that are incredibly successful, they sit and spend a lot of time thinking about what their point of view and perspective is, hone that, spend a lot of time on it.
I also often say to brands, less is more. So if you cannot uphold a high standard of social media, keep 12 tiles on your feed and nothing else. That is a really strong reflection of the brand, rather than constantly trying to keep on the rat race and not do it to the highest standard or to the best quality, because it's better to say nothing than to say the wrong thing.
100%. And I think that obsession with getting on the hamster wheel, and you've got to have something out all the time, you've got to have 4 EDMs a week, and you've got to have X amount of blog posts, and you've got to have these huge social media captions, all of that, it's not true, and it can just be noise. I think people are really sophisticated now, and they're very attuned to when they're being fed crap.
Grace O'Neill is Editor-in-Chief of ELLE Australia and host of the popular cultural criticism podcast After Work Drinks. On today's episode of CEO Yourself, we deep dive her CEO superpower, calm. Grace O'Neill, welcome to CEO Yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's so nice to have you here, and you are the podcast queen, so you can give me tips and tricks throughout the episode.
I have to say, I think this setup is far more professional than anything I've ever done. I think I could get tips from you.
You have, well, not so recently now, you're a year into your tenure as Editor-in-Chief of ELLE Australia. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Such an incredible and well-deserved appointment.
Thank you.
Talk to us about your experience in becoming Editor-in-Chief.
It was really exciting, I think in part because it was unexpected. I was living in London, still kind of living in London, between London and Sydney. And I'd heard that Elle was coming back and was so excited because I'd worked for ELLE Australia under the sort of last iteration before it sadly closed during COVID. And I think there is just this feeling among everyone who works in magazines in Australia, whenever magazines come back, there isn't this like competitive biting thing. There's just this happiness because it's so good for the whole Australian media industry and fashion industry to have as many titles as possible. So I think I was just so excited about the magazine coming back, but because I was over here, it hadn't crossed my mind to apply for it or reach out or anything. And I just happened to run into a former colleague of mine when I was in Paris for Fashion Week, and she had already been appointed as the fashion director, and she sort of asked if I might be interested in putting myself forward for the role. And it was just one of those things that the idea of bringing something back and being able to put a stamp on it, but also sort of really dig deep into why a print magazine exists now and what all these ideas I had of what you could do with a print magazine in like 2024 was so exciting. So I put so much creative energy, I think, into figuring out what that vision was and pitching it, and was very fortunate that they liked it and appointed me. So it was very exciting. But it was also a huge amount of pressure, I think, a lot of which was put on myself because it's such an incredible legacy brand, and it's existed in Australia in sort of multiple iterations over the years, and every single one has been incredible, and the editors that have edited Elle in Australia have been such formidable women. And I think that pressure of relaunching it and everyone kind of looking at it and trying to get it right was so huge.
Yeah, an incredible undertaking. I'm sure it was very intimidating.
It was like I came back to Sydney, I think it was early November. It was actually late November. And we had to have the first issue done to send to the printers the first week of February. It was like 3 or 4 months, and we didn't have a page. Like, we were completely starting from scratch. It was just the most intense experience of just jumping headfirst into something, it was actually really fun, but it was crazy. When I look back, I'm like, I don't know how I did that.
It's been so celebrated, your return and your rebrand of, as you said, such an iconic magazine title. I feel as if, resonating off what you said, is Australian talent is extraordinary and it is celebrated globally. And I'm so proud to be Australian, because living in London, and I'm sure you experience it too, but wherever I go, people go, oh my God, Australian designers. So it's so amazing that Elle has returned, and it allows an opportunity to celebrate our local talent. Where do you think magazines are going though? Like, what is interesting is the industry is evolving at such a rapid pace and continues to, but I do think people are really excited about the resurgence of magazines, particularly in Australia.
I was really pleasantly surprised. I wouldn't have taken the job if I didn't deeply believe that there was still an appetite for print magazines. I think Elle, now being the role of an editor-in-chief, it's almost like a brand manager. You're looking at how this brand exists in so many different formats. Like it's not just print, but to me, the analogy I use is that print's the kind of keystone, which is like in an archway, there's like a tiny little stone at the top that keeps the whole thing together. And to me, print, if you don't have a solid, really strong print product, all the other stuff, the TikTok and the digital offering and the video and the social media, it doesn't work if you don't have that basis. So I think I was so confident that there was an appetite for print in Australia. But even by that standard, I was quite taken aback by how successful the relaunch was. We sold out in like dozens and dozens of newsagents around Australia. I had people messaging me and saying that they'd tried like 3, 4, 5 newsagents and they couldn't get a copy. There was this real sort of groundswell of support in this quite physical, real life way that I think nowadays is a bit of a novelty. Everything's so digital and so immediate, and people are so used to getting whatever they want the second that they want it. And that idea that you had to physically go to like multiple places and couldn't find something was really, I think, exciting for people. But it also spoke to the fact that this is like a tactile, physical thing, and that it's not just that you're picking up something that's beautiful or inspiring, like you can do all those things on digital. It's that you're having this experience that is sitting down where you can't be distracted, away from your phone, away from whatever sort of technological distractions, and you're sitting and experiencing something and reading something. I think that people miss that. So I believe, I do believe very much in the future of print. But I think the big question that I sort of had and that editors have been thinking about is, what is the purpose of a print magazine? Why does it exist? What can we offer that you can't get online with all the there's so much amazing content online. Like, we're all chronically online. I'm chronically online. What is it that will make you go and purchase something? And the thing that I kept coming back to was like extremely good storytelling, like really, really good writing. We have such a high caliber of writers in the magazine. And just the most beautiful imagery. Like you say, Australia has such talented photographers, stylists, artists, illustrators, models, like the most amazing
and the backdrops aren't
designers, the backdrops. Like we wanted it to be, the first issue in particular, like a love letter to young Australian creative talent. And I think a lot of that needs to exist in a physical format for you to really see the like scope of how talented those people are.
What's interesting to me is that you then need to use the social and digital platforms to drive to the print magazine. And how do you balance that? You know, how do you hold back on sharing that incredible iconic image and keep it in the magazine versus putting it online to drive people to the magazine?
It's such an interesting question, and it's one that ever since I kind of started in magazines at a really interesting time. It was about 10 years ago, and it was at this moment where digital was coming up, social media was happening, but there was this real resistance in print media to deal with it. There was like this kind of burying their head in the sand. People didn't want to understand it because they wanted to believe that it wasn't this huge kind of tidal wave that was going to come and dramatically affect how the whole industry runs. And I think now there's no way around it. You have to be really strategic and smart with what you do with social media, how you use it to complement what you do in print. I personally have never been of the belief that like, if you read a story from a magazine on the website, you're therefore not going to then go and buy the magazine in print. Like they're just different things and different experiences. I think the reason people go to print is for the tactility and the I just think there's something about seeing a beautiful fashion image on beautiful paper stock that is completely different to scrolling past it on a screen.
As you said, it's almost a luxury now to experience time off technology. For me,
Yeah.
I think of my most sacred time in the day is bath time at the end of the day. And I always eat chocolate in the bath and have a cup of tea and read magazines or a book. And I put my phone away and there's no technology. And it's such a luxury now to have that moment, even if it's 20 minutes.
100%.
And people are really craving it.
People are. I think that's what it is. It's like allowing yourself to have this time and just to be like, just to immerse yourself in something beautiful. I know it sounds kind of trite, but I think there is so much to be said for just what it does to you to just look at images that are so lovingly put together. Like, I mean, you would know, like the way that creatives, stylists and photographers think about every single image that goes into a fashion story. It's incredible. Like when I sit and watch them work or go on set, the amount of attention to detail, the amount of love that's put into it, the fact that it's a makeup artist and a model and a hairstylist and a creative director and an art director and a props person and a lighting all working together to make this thing as beautiful as it can be. There's something about that, like you say, sitting with that and experiencing that away from technology and distraction, it just like does something to your soul.
It does.
It's good for you. So I think, yeah, the social media thing is something we're always talking about and balancing. I'm a bit more in the vein of, I like to, like when we did the relaunch issue, we did one print cover and then 6 digital covers. And I really wanted it to feel like this sort of flooding of the feed where it was all anyone could see or talk about. And we had a different digital cover every day for that whole week. And then we had video content for all of it. And we gave away a lot of images from the shoot. But to me, I think that just added to the hype. I don't think anyone's like, oh, I've seen the images from the magazine now, I'm not going to buy it. I think you're marketing the product by sharing it. I think this idea that they're cannibalizing each other is very old-fashioned.
Hype is a good word for you because it's something that you create. You have the Midas touch. I know that you're too humble to probably agree with me, but you do. You've gone back, you've relaunched a magazine and are really trying and testing time for publications. You've had huge success. It's been so well received and celebrated, but you also have a wildly successful podcast. To those listening, After Work Drinks has been downloaded more than 3 million times and landed at number 1 in the Aussie podcast charts. Something for me to only dream about in the future. You are able to produce content in so many different formats. What's the secret sauce?
That's a great question. It always feels like it sounds so much more impressive. I love you when you don't walk around in my head all the time. I think with the podcast, that was a really interesting one because that was started 5 years ago, and we definitely saw Isabel, my co-host, and I. We'd kind of watched the generation of like incredible content creators in Australia who had seen that wave of social media and ridden it and just spotted it and done it so incredibly well. And when podcasting happened, we had that moment where we said, this is going to be the next thing, where if we get on it now and we ride it, we'll be cresting at the wave, or whatever the metaphor is. We knew that it was this thing. When we launched, there was so few podcasts in Australia. I think it was like us and Shameless. And those girls are amazing. But it was a freedom, I think, because there wasn't that many other names to compare ourselves to. We had a certain freedom to just like play and have fun. And the thing that we've always come back to with After Work Drinks, and I think what has made it successful, is that we're completely
yourselves.
Yeah, we're guided by us having fun. Like we have such a sense
authentic.
of, if we're not, we've done so many times, we'll be sitting and talking about a topic. I always remember we were talking about, it was like Harry Styles and Emily Ratajkowski had been spotted like kissing in Tokyo, and we were talking about it, and then I was like, I don't give a fuck about this, and Izzy was like, you know what, I don't either. And we just cut it. We were like, we don't care. Or maybe we kept it in, and then people were laughing because we're like, whenever it feels like we're trying to force something and we don't care, we're like, the people listening don't care either. There's some sort of thing that we've managed to get to where we're very in touch with what we personally like, I guess. Like, it's just so informed by that. And I think any time that we've tried to stray towards what we think we should be doing, or we're too inspired by what someone else is doing, or we're thinking, oh my God, for this to work, we've got to be doing X, Y, and Z, or it's got to be structured. Or, you know, when we started, it was like the high-low was everywhere, and we were totally inspired by that. And I feel like our structure was inspired by that. And then we moved away from it just based off what felt natural to us. It's quite a difficult thing to find that that connection with another person where you can kind of have that shorthand together to do that. Like I think it's the two of us together is the sort of secret sauce to it.
These days, as you know, content is king. And for anyone listening, whatever they're looking to sell or whichever service they're looking to develop or whichever brand they have, content's pivotal to success. What is your advice to the listener who might have their own business in its infancy or maybe it's already wildly successful about how to build their kind of content strategy in such a flooded market? You know, anyone can start a brand these days. You just open a Shopify account, an Instagram account, and off you go. That afternoon, you're a CEO.
Totally.
How do you cut through, especially when, let's be honest, traditional print publication opportunities are so limited unless you're an advertiser these days too?
It's so true. I think that I've done a lot of consulting work and copywriting work and working with brands on this exact question. And I think the thing that I always come back to is the thing I just touched on before with the podcast. If you're bored, the readership is bored, the audience is bored. If you're doing something because you're going through the motions and you feel like we should have a newsletter every week, we should have an EDM every week. I've seen this happen. I've been paid to do this before where someone's just paying you to be like, write 7 tips for blah, 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 or like 5 fashion tips for thing or whatever. I'm bored writing it. The person who's reading it, I bet you, is like zoning out as they're reading it. It's a waste of everyone's time. Like the content has to be something that genuinely captures, something unique. And that's why AI is such an interesting thing, because I think so much of the branded content out there could be generated by AI because it doesn't have personality or perspective or originality. And if it doesn't, you may as well just not bother doing it. I think you see with brands that are incredibly successful, they sit and spend a lot of time thinking about what their point of view and perspective is, hone that, spend a lot of time on it. And I think often brands treat words like the most disposable thing. They'll put all this money into campaigns and imagery and visuals and video and social media boosting, and then you know, the intern writes like the marketing campaign or the copywriting and it's full of typos. I look at brands, once you're looking at it, there are brands you look at that are huge, amazingly successful brands and their copy is terrible because they just haven't understood the value of like how powerful words can be and how important it is to work with someone that kind of can see the role that words play and that storytelling plays. So I think I would say to brands, don't do it unless you know what that point of view is, and that when you do figure out what that point of view is, it's very worthwhile investing in a good copywriter who has a background in, especially people who have backgrounds in print. Like honestly, that training, how rigorous it is and the standard that you are expected to work to, it translates so well to working with brands. And I think not enough brands have understood how to like tap that potential.
I also often say to brands, less is more. So if you cannot uphold a high standard of social media, keep 12 tiles on your feed and nothing else that is a really strong reflection of the brand, rather than constantly trying to keep on the rat race and not do it to the highest standard or to the best quality, because it's better to say nothing than to say the wrong thing.
100%. And I think that obsession with getting on the hamster wheel and you've got to have something out all the time and you've got to have 4 EDMs a week and you've got to have X amount of blog posts and you've got to have these huge social media captions, all of that, it's not true, and it can just be noise. I think people are really sophisticated now, and they're very attuned to when they're being fed crap. So if it's not good, that's why I love Substack, because it's like you have to be good to cut through on Substack. There are people with huge social media followings who get no translation because they aren't putting something of substance there, and there are people that have built huge followings without having any sort of existing name or reputation because their work is so good. Like, I think that's the future.
It would be remiss of me to not touch on creativity and inspiration with you, because you have this crazy job. You live a hybrid life with so many different titles and across 2 different cities across the other side of the world. How do you make time to get inspired or to think creatively when I can only imagine how busy you are?
It's probably the most important thing to me. I read last year, or maybe the year before, Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, which our mutual friend Jessica Yolanda Kay and I just like.
The beautiful artist,
The
if
beautiful
you're watching,
artist here
sitting between us.
I feel like this artwork is a result of Rick Rubin's The Creative Act.
We'll make that the resource of the week.
That'll be the resource of the week. We would just go for walks around Holland Park and just talk about that book for like 6 solid months because it was so life-changing. And really that book it's this idea of, instead of focusing on output and what you want to create, focus on living a creative life day to day and your input, and trust the process that the output will kind of come. Which sounds a little bit woo-woo, but it's actually a very effective. I found that it's changed my life. Even the ELLE job coming up, I feel like, was in the aftermath of this journey I was on with my creativity. And it's a really simple example would be, there's a more beautiful way to walk home, but it's a slightly longer way. So you tell yourself, no, I've got to get home to do X, Y, Z. Rick Rubin would say, my friend Rick, he would say, always your instinct to take the more beautiful route home, or to walk past the bakery, or to get the nicer, whatever, groceries from the place where it's like the packaging's more beautiful. Like those things feed your creativity in micro ways. And then in macro ways, it means that you'll watch some great movie instead of just binging another Netflix show, or you'll like sit and read before bed instead of scrolling on your phone. It's like your brain is tapping into this appetite of just wanting to feed your creative soul all the time. So for me, I'm really strict with that. Like every Friday I go take myself to a movie by myself.
Wow.
Or to an art gallery. There's this amazing book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's kind of another one of those like creativity Bibles, but she talks about artist dates and how you have to take yourself on a date, like, and do something creative. So I'm quite strict with that because I just feel like I'm so out of whack when I'm not doing things like that prioritize being creative. Everything just feels boring.
That's such a beautiful reminder. Now, moving into your CEO superpower, you chose calm.
Yes.
Which I needed this morning. It was totally chaotic. I had Xanthi. She had like one of her first meltdowns about me leaving her, and it was so hard to leave her, and I just knew I had to just stop. I was running late, but I knew I just had to stop and sit with her and be with her. Children are so amazing at doing that. And I knew that we were deep diving calm together today, and it was such an amazing reminder to have even just the word at the forefront of my mind, because then when I got in the car, it was my instinct to like rush through the moment, like rush into the car, drive faster than I probably should, so on and so forth. But I was like, I'm just going to breathe and I'm going to be calm, and I know everything will work out as it's meant to. Why did you choose the superpower calm, and how do you use it in your day-to-day life?
It's funny. I was thinking about, because it's such an interesting question to think about, something that we don't tend to think about what we're proud of or what we offer in our jobs. And it was quite fun to think about it. And I think the reason I picked calm and loved calm is because I have just not historically in my life ever been someone who's calm. This is like, I kind of surprised myself in this job. I've always suffered from really bad anxiety, especially when I was younger, in my early 20s. It was like debilitating. And I ended up seeing an amazing psychologist, and I did cognitive behavioral therapy. And that whole process, it really taught me that I think whatever can feel like your worst quality or the thing that you struggle the hardest with, there's this flip side to it where it can be your superpower. And I think for me, anxiety has always felt like this just sort of constant rush of, I feel like it sounds weird saying voices in my head. It's not voices, but it's like these constant stresses and these constant panicking about what could go wrong. I think anxiety, for me, the way it manifests itself is catastrophizing and constantly worrying about what the worst case scenario is. And what has happened because of that, I think, is I've learned to manage fears of stressful situations and be able to sit with the discomfort of a situation which is stressful and respond to it calmly, because I feel like I've sort of trained my brain over time to be able to look at the alternate narratives when something feels like a huge drama or a massive deal. And that's not to say I do that all the time or that I've like totally figured life out, but I really found with editing ELLE, when you edit a magazine, a big part of your job, I'm sure, like being a CEO, you're just putting out fires all the time. Like every day there's like 8 different things that come to you because you're doing shoots and there's money involved, and whatever happens, people get sick, studios cancel, like the flights get delayed, talent can't make it, you have to change a shoot, and that's going to cost a huge amount of money to change a shoot by 3 days. Or like there's just things that happen all the time that's just part of the job. If you're not able in those moments to sit and calmly listen to the information and make clear-headed decisions, and you become part of the like cacophony of noise, because people come to you stressed. They're like, oh my God, this thing has happened. There was so much of that in that relaunch issue because there was pressure on it, and you know, it was a big thing, and expectation, and it was a short timeline, and all of the other things to do with print magazines. It's print, so there's so much pressure when you're sending it to the printers because you're like, if there's any mistakes, we can't do anything. Like we're getting thousands of copies printed.
But also you set the tone for your team. It's like when I was going to get married, so many people said to me, and it was such amazing advice, and now I always share it, but the bride and groom set the tone.
Yeah.
And the best weddings are not the most glamorous. They're not the most over the top. They're not even the most picturesque. It's where the bride and groom are like so in tune with one another and so in love. And that energy then just transmits through the whole room. And I feel like it's the same when you're the CEO or the editor-in-chief. Your energy sets the tone for everyone else.
It's so true. Like that was another part of that I really noticed, was that people would come in, and that's another thing you learn when you're the editor, or when you're the editor or the boss, is like you are so responsible for how everyone else in the office feels, and you have to take that responsibility so seriously, because if someone comes to you and says there's a problem and you go, oh my God, what is it? Like they're panicked, you're just creating this ping pong effect that radiates through the office. And that's so true, that I felt such a responsibility that I didn't want anyone on my team to take on any additional stress of what was happening. So bringing that sense of calm, and that anything that was presented, there was a solution to, we could fix it, it was going to be okay, there was going to be a creative workaround. I think it really allowed the team to like flourish and thrive in an environment which could have been, and was at times, very stressful.
How have you learned to practically navigate it? Because I found at times in my past in careers where I've had, you know, a number of people reporting to me and big teams, and you're, you know, maybe you're managing pressure from the top and from the bottom. I found I was constantly going to get a coffee because it was such a good way for me to digest information and to then come back as the best version of myself and kind of like diffuse stressful situations, and then come back and kind of soften perhaps the blow or whatever it was. How do you practically take on that stressful energy or situation and then switch it into calm?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think having time to sit and digest something, as you said, and think about it is so important. So I make a real point. If I would get called about something, I really, really try not to be reactive. So saying, okay, I'm going to sit on this and even call you back in 10 minutes. Even if it's something that feels urgent and people want an answer on quickly, I would always just give myself a minute to step back and not respond straight away. And the same with emails or whatever, something that sudden pressures being put on you, just taking a very short amount of time to like sit and breathe and think through it. From a pragmatic perspective as well, something that I was taught in therapy was when you're catastrophizing, say there's like an example that we always used to use was, because I would have quite bad social anxiety. Say I walked into the office and said hi to someone and they didn't say hi back. My brain would be like, they hate you. Everyone in the office hates you. Like it would just jump down this thing. And the idea is to bring in alternative narratives. So bring in like 3 additional things that could also be true. The person didn't hear you. The person had a bad day. The person's got headphones, whatever. That just takes suddenly all the heat out of the situation, and your brain goes from panic mode to like calm mode. So I try to do a version of that with work, where if there's a situation where something feels very stressful, the shoot has to be cancelled, but that's suddenly up here. Just adding narratives of like, the shoot the shoot needs to be moved, the shoot needs to be postponed. That might not be a great example, but just switching up the narrative from this one terrible thing to 3 or 4 multiple options of what could be happening next. It just makes it feel like less of a drama. And then I even find in the way you talk about it, that then changes the way people respond to things. If you say, oh my God, this massive dramatic thing has happened, then everyone's like, what? And if you just say, hey, we've got to push this thing back, and you bring that energy, that kind of, everyone takes it down a notch as well.
What amazing work you've done to navigate what sounds like a really difficult feeling, like internal dialogue to overcome. And I'm so glad you've done it before you take on your next title, Mother. I'm so excited for you. You're about to become, or not about, you're on your journey of pregnancy to becoming a mother.
Yes.
And with those tools, I know you'll overcome and navigate the motherhood journey so beautifully. I wish I'd had those tools before I had a baby.
I don't know. It's really hard. It's amazing as well how you can learn something and then you get put in a situation and it all just goes out the window. I'm like, I'll probably listen back to this and be like, you didn't do any of that.
Well, it's just so interesting to hear you talk about it and that you navigated it before this next chapter, because everything you speak of, I only experienced once I became a mother. And the way I learned to navigate it with my therapist and through my own tools was, this is a superpower. Anxiety is a superpower if you can switch the thinking. So my reactions are at times totally over the top. My husband said that to me on the weekend when I jumped into action about something, but it is a superpower that's injected in women when they give birth. And it is such a unique experience becoming a mother. But with your mind going into overdrive about what could happen, I know that it's just a beautiful talent now to prepare myself for what could happen. Yeah. And then to navigate what does happen at times in a new way, I guess.
It is kind of like, what's really difficult about anxiety is sometimes it is acting in your best interest. And that's what I struggled with for a long time, is I was like, is this my intuition? Like, that became the problem, is I would then trust instincts I had that weren't correct because they were overcompensating or overly fearful. But there is parts of your anxiety that's really protective. And I feel like, even things like being anxious about the future has made me, I think, hyper-focused at doing well at work in a way that's been really good for my career, or made me, I just think there's so many ways in which being anxious has impacted my life positively.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about it that way. But I also struggle with one thing around now navigating anxiety, which is, how do you find trust in the core truth, or as you said, your intuition? Like, what is anxiety and what's intuition, and then re-navigating trust. But I'm learning through conversations like this that the more you practice trusting yourself, the more you build trust, and then it becomes, I guess, natural again.
100%. And there's something, even just being pregnant now, there's something really weird and just primal and amazing about learning to trust yourself and learning that so often you can look back and you'll be like, I knew that was the wrong thing, or I knew I should have said yes to that, or I knew, we do know, but learning to get in that dialogue with what you already know is just weirdly so hard.
That's one of the best things I would say about becoming a mum, I think, from a career perspective, is that it just brings so clearly into line what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah.
So, for example, this morning when Xanthi was upset, it just immediately was like, okay, you drop everything and you just sit with her and you make her feel better, and then she's the priority. And then it helps you just to realize, okay, none of those silly things that I was worrying about matter. There's no rush. Everything just is as it's meant to be.
100%.
It's a beautiful experience.
And as you were saying before, being responsible for the energy you bring into, this is something Zach, my husband, and I talk about a lot. You have to, it's all well and good working and saying we work really hard because, of our family or thing or whatever. But we've really tried this year to take responsibility for, you need to try not to bring work home. I'm really really guilty of this. When you're really stressed, we all have a bad habit, I think, of putting on our best face and being our best selves and being our most calm, resilient, taking the heat out of things, making sure everyone feels okay at work. And then we just come home and bring our demon selves home, where we have no patience and we're tired, and people walk through the door and we're it's, you've got to, that energy, the best self that you bring at work, you need to prioritize having that at home, even more so than having it at work. It's funny how we can,
easier said than done.
Way easier said than done.
I think one of the questions that I hadn't planned to ask you, but comes to mind is, how do you practically manage your time? Because you are finding time to be inspired and to get creative. As I said, you're living a hybrid life between Australia and the UK. You have multiple different business pursuits. How do you manage your time each day and each week?
It's been particularly hard this year because I've just been literally all over the show. Like, it was the ELLE relaunch was like 3 months in Sydney, and then it was coming back, and then I got married, and then we moved, and then I went back to Sydney for the September issue. But
and then you fell pregnant.
And I felt pregnant. Like, everything's just, it's
all happening.
It's been a year. It's been a year. But it feels, when I have like even just a week where I know where I'm going to be and everything's set, I'm not good at it, but I try to be very, very disciplined with my time. It's the thing I probably find the hardest. And when I'm in London, because I'm like working from home or working from a co-working space or whatever, not going into the office every day, it's really easy to like lose a day. You can waste a day. So I get up, luckily I think because of the time zone, I'm usually up at like 6 a.m. because I'm talking to people in Australia from like 6:37 onwards. And from there I have pretty strict segments of time where it'll be like ELLE time, and then I also do some consulting work. That time will be carved out. Podcast time will be carved out. And
right,
even
so you do the blocks.
Yeah, I do
Amazing.
And I do the Pomodoro method. I'm obsessed with it.
Oh, tell me more.
Have you done that before?
No.
It's like, I don't even know where. Someone amazing told me about it, but it's like a Pomodoro timer is like a tomato, the Pomodoro tomato.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the time it takes to, I don't know, boil one. Someone discovered that if you do the 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, it's incredibly effective for productivity.
Amazing.
So,
we'll implement that.
Yeah,
See
it's on.
yourself.
Yeah, it's on. You can just
that can
Google
be our
it.
Wellness Wednesday tip of the week.
It's the best tip. It's like you get so much work done. You can't believe how much stuff you can tick off a to-do list in 25 minutes. It's crazy.
Okay, we're going to try that.
Yeah.
Well, we always close out with the same question. What is your legacy piece of advice?
That's such an amazing question and such a huge question. But I think to come back to what we were talking about before, I think everything to me begins and ends with creativity. And I think we live in a society and a culture now that really teaches us not to value it, and we're so much worse off for it because we see creativity as being like at odds with productivity when actually they complement each other. So I think carving out space and time for and prioritizing your own creativity is the best thing anyone can do in any industry.
Especially in an AI age. It's all going to be about how creative you can be.
Exactly. That's the superpower.
And where can the listener find you?
You can find me, at ELLE Australia. September issue is out now. Podcast, After Work Drinks podcast, and then just on good old Instagram, Grace O'Neill.
Thank you so much for being here, Grace. I'm such a fan of your work. As I said, you truly have the Midas touch. And I'm so excited for you to enter into the chapter of motherhood.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. Thank you.
It would mean the world to me if you would share today's episode with someone you feel would enjoy it. And don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment.